Good afternoon, and welcome to episode number 38 of At Your Service with Haber and Martinez. I'm Haber. That's Martinez. How you doing, Martinez?
Good, brother. Good to see you, man.
Looking all snazzy in a suit and tie today. Someone
I
must have
know.
had court this morning.
No, I didn't have court. I met with a client today. I had to work.
Oh, okay. Well, some of us are comfortable working at home in our Haber PA UPF 50 hoodie. Um, let me welcome the folks to our episode today. Today is a dovetail from last week. On episode 37 last week, Ed and I spent the hour discussing Florida's wiretap law and electronic eavesdropping issues. And while we had that discussion, we dovetailed a little bit into video. It was mostly about audio, but we dovetailed into video with a promise that this week we would follow up with a focus exclusively on video. So I've named this show, episode 38, Police Body-Worn Cameras, Cops Recording Citizens, and Vice Versa. And what we're going to talk about is a variety of issues, not just police body cam. You all know what that is. That's like the camera that's usually mounted on the officer's, the center of the officer's vest. Sometimes it's on their shoulder. Occasionally they wear what used to be called Google glasses. But in any event, it is a streaming audio and video of what is happening in the moment, assuming that it's activated and that it's recording and uploading. We're not going to limit to police body cams because there's other types of police surveillance that we're going to talk about as well. For instance, inside many police cars, there is audio and video wired recording devices. Usually audio, now more and more often video, so that they put you in the back of the police car, they shut the door, and then you think that they're powwowing about doing whatever, but what they're really doing is hoping that you're going to start yapping to yourself or trying to talk to somebody else or making statements or doing, foolish acts that are going to be recorded on camera. Then, of course, they have video virtually everywhere in most police stations and most jails. We'll talk about that. But we're also going to talk about things like LBCs and LPRs. Those are land-based cameras and license plate readers. And so you see a lot of this often. This is coming up more and more frequently. You see those police cars that are driving down the street, and it used to be back in the day, you'd see like they'd have 8 or 10 different antennas on them. And you were like, wow, why does that police car have so many antennas? Well, now you see them with each corner of the vehicle, the front and rear fenders on either side, with mounted stationary cameras on the vehicles. Those are roving license plate scanners. And then, of course, they have stationary ones, and we're going to talk about those as well. We're also going to talk about other types of video for citizens as opposed to law enforcement. For example, Ring doorbell videos, or a private citizen who decides, you know what, that police officer may be recording with body cam, but I'm going to record this too. So he pulls out his cell phone and he decides to record it. Or some bystander or a passenger or an innocent third party or whatever, maybe videotaping a police citizen encounter. Then we're going to talk a little about evidentiary concerns. How does this stuff apply in a courtroom? How does it work? How do you get it in? How do you keep it out? What does the state use it for? What does the defense use it for? And then we'll also hopefully give you our pro tips in the forms of cans and can'ts, do's and don'ts, shoulds and shouldn'ts. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Body-worn camera. As I said, y'all know what a body-worn camera is, but let me give you a little bit of etymology. They didn't start here in the United States. The first law enforcement body-worn cameras were deployed in the United Kingdom. Britain started using them in the early 2000s. They became functional here in the United States, mainstream, about just after 2010, somewhere around 2012, 2013, 2014. The trigger, probably a bad pun, so pardon me, but the trigger for body-worn camera here in the U.S. is pretty much established as occurring in Ferguson, Missouri, when Michael Brown was shot. That was a very controversial police shooting, still is, I suppose, and it created what we in the criminal defense community have dubbed the Ferguson Effect. And that was a chilling of law enforcement for fear of being accused of impropriety when they didn't do anything wrong. Ergo, jumping forward to the idea of police body-worn cameras. Some might think that these were designed to protect the police, and in part they are, but they're also designed to protect the public, and they're designed to protect particular individual citizens who are engaged in police-citizen encounters. So I've rambled on for a few minutes now. I know it's tough for Martinez to keep quiet.
I know, right?
what-
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
What do you have to say about all this?
Well, listen, respectfully, and again, nothing against law enforcement or state attorneys or the government. I support our law enforcement officers. It's a tough job, and it's essential, and it's very misunderstood. But I'm sorry, Mike. Make no mistake about it. Body-worn cameras were initially deployed and devised to protect law enforcement. Now,
to protect law enforcement from what?
From lies, defendants saying that they did this when they didn't do it. He beat me when he did. I wasn't resisting when the cop had to really like get rough with the guy. I wasn't doing nothing. I was just sitting there. And so cops kept saying he's lying. He swung at me. He did this. He did that. Now, what is the byproduct though? It's beautiful, I think, and wonderful byproduct is that it has protected citizens. Because I was just talking about this with somebody earlier today. I don't understand how many times, Mike, have you gotten a body worn on one of your cases? And first we get the reports, right? Because it takes the body worn a while. We get the reports and the officer wrote what happened. Then we get the body cam, and as we're questioning if this is even the same case. It is completely different than what he wrote. And that is one I do not understand. How many cops, you're wearing the body worn. I don't understand why you're writing something that's not what happened. It still happens. So let's be fair. There are many times where I am glad that there's a body worn because it shows that my client is not lying. And I have a similar case right now. You know that I have a case where my client came in, told me that he's arrested for driving a stolen vehicle, told me that he thought he was being carjacked. Said, Ed, he didn't look like a cop to me. And I'm thinking, come on, he's wearing a uniform. It was a patrolman. How could he not think it was a cop? He says, I thought it was some guy that was trying to carjack me. I really didn't believe him, Mike. I really didn't believe him. And then I get the body worn. And sure enough, he's dressed in all tactical black. The only insignia that says he's a cop is the little patch on his shoulder and a little tiny nameplate right here that says police. And he came up to the car this way. So my client never saw this part of him. And on the body worn, he opens the door and you never hear him say police. Now, granted, for whatever reason, I don't know the technical part of it. But Mike, right, all your body worns, it takes 30 seconds before you can start hearing. Starts recording, and then at 30 seconds is when you can start hearing what's happening. So for the first 30 seconds, we don't hear anything. But what I do see is he opens the door, and the first thing he does, he grabs my client by the throat like this, pins him up, and over on the center console, puts a forearm on him, and just starts wailing on him. That's not what he wrote in the A form. He wrote that he told him he announced police, and he asked him several times to please exit the vehicle, and it's a flat-out lie. He might have been.
That was before he activated the body cam. He very politely introduced himself as a police officer and invited your client to exit the vehicle politely and a gentleman, so that we can discuss.
Actually,
this.
I think he gave him a butterscotch candy too.
Yeah.
And then the other part is that there's his partner, and I mean, look, I don't want to call the guy an idiot, but his partner wrote that he was standing in front of my client's vehicle when my client tried to run him over. So they tried to get him for ag assault with a deadly weapon in the vehicle. And when I look at his body cam, he's 200 yards away arresting somebody else. Like, I don't understand that. I just don't get that.
So I think there's a lot to unpack there. All right. So let's start with some of the initial BWC observations. If the BWC is activated and working properly, it's a check valve for everybody. Okay. Correct. The police officer who's wearing it presumably should know that he or she who is actually making this recording, everything that's said and done is going to be preserved on video. So to your statement that, what are these guys thinking? Let me use an example that I think most people can relate to, whether they've been through it or not. They can probably understand it. DUI cases. I would say the vast majority, probably well over 90% of DUI cases, because some of them happen because police are dispatched to an accident or because they conduct a welfare check for a car parked on the side of the road. But most of the time, they occur pursuant to a traffic stop. Police officer observes some sort of conduct, and that triggers probable cause that a traffic violation has occurred, and that allows them to detain stop the vehicle and detain the driver. And then what flows from there, the officer approaches the window comes down, they ask for the registration, license, and insurance, and then the next thing you know, I detected an odor of alcoholic beverage coming off of the person's
Bloodshot
person of
water.
the subject.
Bloodshot water.
I
Yeah.
noticed bloodshot and watery eyes, slurred speech, blah, blah, blah. All the stuff you expect to see in there, right? So if the dash cam or if the body cam is rolling, now we have two issues. I'm going to pause for 1 second because I want to talk a little bit about dash cam. Unlike body cam, which is by definition attached to the body of the officer, dash cam is attached to the vehicle. Sometimes it's actually mounted on the interior of the dashboard of the police squad car. So it either points forward or backwards or sideways if it's fisheye or whatever, but it'll show you the vehicle as opposed to just what the officer is capturing on his lens. Sometimes those dash cams are mounted in the front grille of the vehicle as well. So either way, the idea is you're getting a different angle. And in a DUI case, both dash cam and body cam are concurrently a defense lawyer's best friend and worst enemy. It just depends on what the recording shows, right?
Well,
so
right.
To your point, where you say the officer writes in the police report X, let's go back 20 years when there was no audio or video. Let's go back before the Ferguson Effect. Let's go back to, say, the 1990s, when it was simply a matter of he said, she said. The officer makes the arrest, they walk into court, they put their hand up and swear on a busload of bishops and a cardinal to boot that they're there to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. And then they proceed to say that they stopped your client for X, they observed Y, and then Z happened and they had to make the arrest. And then your client may or may not give testimony refuting it, or you may or may not make argument, as to reasonable doubt or conflicts in the evidence or lack of evidence or what have you. But at that time, there was no video or audio. So you had to rely on the officer's word, and these were what we called he said, she says. Now, when you start tacking on audio and video, it's not so much what he said, she said. It's what the jury sees and hears in light of what he said, she said. So when you start to get to these situations where there's inconsistencies, and DUIs are a great example, and here's why. Let's forget the driving pattern for a minute. Let's get right up to the point where the officer asks you to step outside of the vehicle and take roadside sobriety exams or field sobriety tests, right? These tests, they're going to have you walk the straight line. They're going to have you stand on one leg. They're going to have you balance. They're going to have you touch the finger to your nose. They're going to take a look at your eyeballs. They're going to conduct a series of very structured examinations where they give you rapid fired directions. They may or may not show you what they expect you to do. But in any event, there's no, pre-test where you get to try it out, anything like that. You're just expected to listen, be attentive.
And there's another thing, Mike, that the video shows, which also helps us many times in these cases, especially with the DUIs. A lot of times when the cops would come in, one of the things, you do as a defense attorney as well, you say they failed to walk and turn because you told them to walk 8 steps, touching heel to toe, and then take tiny little steps. Are you sure they understood you? I made it crystal clear. Now that we have body cam, these dash cams, these body cams, a lot of times you hear the officer giving the explanation. And in fairness to them, sometimes they thought they were crystal clear. They thought they said touch heel toe, but they forgot it. But because they were going off of memory, the client didn't touch heel toe, and they're like, oh, he failed because he didn't do that. And now the body cams help there as well, saying, see, you really didn't say touch heel toe.
Well, the thing is, so the first thing is here with what I was getting at with the FSTs is there are so many, the minutia is very important in these tests. And so when you have an officer testifying that the individual didn't touch heel to toe on step number 5, right? Well, you want to be able to see that in the video, because otherwise, if it's just the officer's word, then why should we accept it when we have video? Prior to video, it was, I'm here to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. And he's got his shiny uniform and his little, his badge that's all polished.
And
They come in looking like a million.
I was one of those state attorneys who would say, now, officer, do you have anything personal against this defendant? Do you have an axe to grind? Did you know him before this day? So it kind of corroborates that, look, I got nothing personal here.
Listen, I've had DUI police officers literally say to a jury, and so I'm very careful not to give them the opportunity, but I've seen them do this where they say, to look at the jury and say, Mr. Haber, I felt horrible about arresting your client. Your client was a very nice person, seemed like a really sweet kid. It broke my heart. I thought of my own son when I arrested him, or my own daughter.
You got to tell me off camera who did that to you.
Yeah, it's happened. But my point is not so much that. It is, as a defense attorney, we're going to pick apart those roadside sobriety exams. It's a lot easier to do it when we have a video that either doesn't show it or shows something different, right? So that's why I say it's your best friend and your worst enemy at the same time, because if we look at this video and we say to ourselves, you know what, the officer was very respectful, very articulate, very plain and simple, unambiguous, the client was just simply physically unable to perform for whatever reasons, whether it was physical, mental, a combination, whatever it may have been, they just didn't do it. The test looks bad. Well, that helps us in terms of showing it to the client and explaining to them where the problems in the case are.
I was just going to say, it doesn't really hurt us. And no disrespect to the client. It hurts the client, but it is what it is, man. And sometimes it helps us sometimes it helps with that come to Jesus conversation with the client of God.
If you have to have it. But on the other hand, it can come back where it's very helpful to us, as you said, where the officer writes in the A form, because on the DUI checklist, they're not only going to write it, but the checklist has a physical picture of those 9 heel-to-toe steps, and then the pivot as they tell you to do it, and the 9 heel-to-toe steps back. And the officers literally check off on the imagery on the form where the person stepped off, where the person didn't do it right. And so there's so much going on here, right? Think about this for a minute. You've got an officer who's giving you instructions, watching how you perform, and grading you on the test. Concurrently, it's got to be documented, right? What are the odds that these guys are watching their own body cam when they write up that police report? About 1 billion to 1. They don't do that. They don't have the time to do that. They're busy. They got a ton of paperwork to do. They got to get back out on the road, make another arrest, and get a little more overtime.
And that's why I'm saying I'm fair. Like, look, I get it. You might have thought you said something. Like in the case that you're talking about a DUI, but look, mine's a major felony. Mine was grand theft auto, and then 2 batteries, aggravated batteries or assaults on police officers. So this was some serious charges. And sometimes you kind of think you said something or think it happened a certain way, and I can understand that. The case that I gave, though, is just like night and day. Now, let me give you one word to help the state and really help me with my come to Jesus conversation with my client was actually a DUI, where the client kept telling me, no, they're wrong. I did the roadside's perfect. I don't know what he's talking about. He's lying. I didn't miss any heel to toes. I did it perfect. Took forever to get the dash cam. Mike, she was swaying. When she did the rock and turn, she looked like she was sashaying on the runway. Not only was she not touching heel toe, there was like a good 8-inch gap between her feet. She couldn't even walk in a straight line. Did a pirouette at the end, like if she was on the runway. Came back. Then as the cop was talking to her, she was swaying. And finally, when the cop said, put your hands on the hood, her face was right in the dash cam like this. And when the cop says, listen, I'm now placing you on arrest for DUI, my client went like this. I know. So,
In a couple of months ago, we did a show with Mike Catalano as a guest where it was just specifically on DUI, and we showed 2 videos during that show. One of them was of a female defendant who had got pulled over for speeding very late at night, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And the dash cam video and audio was, crystal clear. The officer walks up to her, asks her for the registration, this, that, and the other. and she rolls down the window and she's confused and kind of digging through her thing and looking through stuff, and she pulls out a wad of cash and goes to hand it to the officer, and he's like, "Ma'am, I don't need cash. I need your driver's license. I need your registration and proof of insurance." And she says, "Oh, I'm sorry." She puts it back. She comes out and she pulls out cash again. Ultimately, she wound up not only getting a DUI, but got charged with bribery of an officer. It was absurd. She was hammered. There's no question she was hammered. But I could see that client coming into my office and saying to me, "Oh, this is a bunch of bullshit. I never said that. I never did that." Now,
Right.
Again, absent the video, it's he said, she said. Officer's going to swear that it happened. Perhaps she'll swear that it didn't. But with the video, everything is honest. You can't get out of
That's the key.
that reality. It is what it is. But what happens when the audio or video is tampered with? For instance, let's take the case you were talking about, the ag assault and ag battery on a Leo. You don't hear the audio. How do you know that the officer did not say, "Sir, I'm a police officer, please exit your vehicle"? How do you know that wasn't done before your audio kicked on? So
Well, we can make
officers
argument. We can make argument, but you're right. There's not. We don't know.
Right, it's argument. Well, and so that's what trials are all about, right? Trying to figure out who's telling the truth. Who's
Although I
more
think my
likely.
guy, I got to be honest, I think my guy's screwed because he kept punching him in the face, telling him, "Get out of the car." And then he said, "I'll shoot you in the head." And that went on for about a minute. And not once did he say police.
Right.
So I think my
Well,
guy
I
is
mean,
a little
again,
screwed.
You have look. We
And I
work
mean the
with what
cop. is
we
screwed.
work with what we have, right? So I want to harp a little more on these pros and cons, so to speak, as I put in the promo for the show. So one of the things that for police a pro is it's evidence, right? When a police officer says, thereupon the defendant offered me money, tried to bribe me to not give him a ticket or to not arrest him. If it's on video, the statement is preserved. My making the statement is incontrovertible unless they're able to prove that they hired George Clooney, who looks almost identical to me, and
Yeah.
he's the one who actually made the statement.
As a matter of fact, the first time I met you, I thought it was George Clooney. A
So-
much shorter, smaller version of George Clooney.
Poorer. Don't forget poorer. Yeah, I don't have a place on Lake Como. My point being, it's hard to deny the statement or the act. So, like, let's say that your client does take a swing at a uniformed police officer, right? If it's on video, it's an obvious pro because now you have evidence, you have witness statements, you have events that are basically incontrovertible, at least from that angle. And we're going to talk about how they may be controvertible from other angles in a moment. Next would be transparency and accountability, right? Because the officer wearing the body cam knows they're being recorded, right? I mean, you can't put your camera on and not know you're being recorded unless you're an idiot, in which case you probably shouldn't have that job. But so it is a pro, I think, for law enforcement because we've talked about this many times.
And the
Are there
good
bad?
cops, by the way,
Are
the
there
good
bad
cops
seeds?
love it.
Are there bad seeds in law enforcement? Absolutely. Just like there are in every other occupation or walk of life, including lawyers, maybe especially lawyers. But the vast majority of law enforcement are dedicated, hardworking, law-abiding individuals who would love to see that 1% off the police force because they make them look bad. So the accountability factor for police is a pro. And then finally, again, indisputable proof in court proceedings is a pro. Because once that evidence is admitted and introduced, it's there for the jury to see. So it could, whether it works to our advantage or to our disadvantage or to the state's advantage or disadvantage, that's individual, will vary from case to case. And again, there may be other stuff. We're going to talk about Derek Chauvin and George Floyd in a couple of minutes, because that's a great example of how an officer's body cam shows you X, but other angles being recorded from other people concurrently at the same time give you a more complete picture, right? So I don't want to talk about Chauvin and Floyd from a political point of view or a guilt or an innocence point of view. I just want to talk about it from an evidentiary point of view, because it's interesting when you get multiple angles, things take on a different a perspective. But before I get there, just one last thing. Going back to the DUI, this is why I brought up the body cam with DUI. In my experience, the body cams generally are mounted right about here at eye level, and they don't give you a fisheye view. So when the officer is doing the HGN test, like this, right? Follow that. The camera is being blocked by his arm, and it's only getting the subject up to here or here.
Right.
You never see this guy's eyes. So the officer's writing, his eyes were tracking, he had nystagmus, they were bouncing around like pinballs, whatever it is he wants to say, but we're not going to see it. It's very rare that on a DUI video you actually see the HGN. Depending upon the angle and depending upon the smarts of the officer. So an intelligent setup, normally, especially if it's at night, right, you're going to have more than one officer. One officer is going to be conducting the FSTs. Another officer is going to be standing off to the side for officer safety, making sure that this guy doesn't do anything stupid, that nobody, comes out of left field and runs him over, that the public is aware that there are multiple police on the scene for a variety of reasons. And hopefully that officer is wearing body cam too, because that will give you a different angle. And then the car may have dash cam or grill cam, in which case, if they're doing the roadsides in front of the vehicle, it'll be recorded there as well. So the more you get, the more angles, the better a picture we get, right?
For sure.
Just think about the greatest movie directors, and how they film. Sometimes they're filming a scene and you're watching a dialogue and then it'll switch to another angle, although the scene never stops. But the camera angle changes and it gives you a completely different perspective.
I can give you an example of when I was a prosecutor. I was writing yesterday with one of the former Coral Gables narcotics detectives. And we were talking about the warehouse they had and how, Mike, I don't know if you ever had a case with Coral Gables narcotics, but when I was a prosecutor, every defense attorney, the minute they found out that the deal happened in that Coral Gables narcotics warehouse, they were like, forget it, we're done. Because they had
wired 6 ways from Sunday.
They had camera angles from all areas.
Every corner.
Cameras outside in the parking lot. It was like a professional production and everything was crystal clear. You could hear everything perfectly. It was very difficult to deny that you knew. And these guys were also very good at what they did. They made sure that they got the defendants to basically act and admit that they knew this was a drug deal. I mean, it was bad enough that they handed them a kilo of cocaine or money for ecstasy pills or whatnot. They would say, hey, is this really good coke? Can I get better? More? You got more? Wait, can we get more? Oh, I can get as much as you want, whenever you want. And then you know how these guys are. They would brag. I can get you what you want. I can get you a tractor trailer full of cocaine. Well, you can't deny you thought that this was, you were buying baby powder now. You can't say that. So the video works. And like I was trying to say earlier, the cops that I know that are good cops, not only are they okay with the body cam, they love the body cameras because they know they're not going to do anything wrong. And for years, they were sick and tired of defendants lying and people doubting whether the defendant was telling the truth or not. So they love the body cams.
Well, this is part of what we call the Ferguson effect, right? I mean, this is officers now having to worry about false allegations against them, exaggerated allegations against them. And, look, it's problematic for everybody. And I'm not saying that there aren't times where it's appropriate. There are. But let's go back to Chauvin and Floyd, right? So Chauvin's got he directs Floyd to the ground, and he's got that chokehold on him, right? And the video's recording the whole time. Whatever it was like 8 minutes of video that was being recorded. But it only showed what it showed. It wasn't a video from behind Chauvin showing everything, right? It was from his chest to the direct angle in front of it, which was only so much. But for other angles from civilians who were recording on cell phones and other officers who were on scene wearing other body cam, did we get a full picture? And were we able to see what really happened there and how atrocious it actually was? So it really didn't matter what Chauvin said because we got to see it. Right? And so it's very easy. It's not always effective. I don't mean easy in terms of successful. I mean easy in terms of ability. It's easy for people to say whatever. Clients do it all the time, especially during initial consultations when we're talking to them, and I shut them down right away. I mean, I always say, look, you might think I'm being disrespectful, but I'm not. Please bear with me and you'll understand. And the reason is, I don't want them to tell me their version of events until after I have read the police reports and understand the government's version of events.
Correct.
Why? Because it's not the defendant's burden of proof, it's the government's burden of proof. So the defense need not say anything. The government needs say everything. And if the government's assessment of the case is in and of itself defective, I may not ever need the defendant to say anything. If the government's case is solid, then we have to go to the next step, and we have to examine where it is from the defense perspective, where we're going to chip away at it. But the starting point begins there. And like you said, we're not entitled to body cam until at the earliest 15 days after the defendant is formally charged at arraignment, which is usually about 6 weeks after their arrest, 5-6 weeks after they've been arrested. So here in Florida, anyhow. So, we're not going to get that video for a while, which means we have to be aware that if the video exists, that's more for us to consider. But we still start with the fundamental block of what do the cops say? And then we get into the next thing, because I don't want my client saying to me, oh, I never said this, I never said that. And then that's rolling around in the back of my head, right?
Right.
There's going to be a video, and I'm going to know whether or not he said X, Y, or Z when I get that video.
Well, they like telling me the story. And the other thing is, just as a pro tip, if you ever have to hire a lawyer, be it civil, criminal, family, whatever it is, for God's sakes, you have to tell us the truth. We're not going to work harder for you because you tell us you're innocent. That's not our job. Our job is to make sure that the government does their job. A good criminal, especially criminal defense lawyer, I know you get this all the time, right, Michael? How can you defend these guys, these dirtbags, these criminals? Listen, don't take this the wrong way. We're not defending anybody. We're defending the Constitution. We're defending the criminal justice system the way it is. What our job is to make damn sure, and this is the way I used to teach it at the academy. Our job is to make damn sure that every prosecutor, at least in the jurisdictions we practice in, and every cop in the jurisdictions we practice in, think, I better get this right, because if Ed Martinez or Michael Haber get this case, they're going to pick it apart and find every tiny mistake. That's the job, because then we can make sure that innocent people do not go to prison. That's our job. So you can tell us you did it. It's not going to bother us. We're not going to work any less. We're not going to tell you have to take a plea, because it's not about that. It's about doing what's right and making sure that we hold the government's feet to the fire. So for God's sakes, you got to tell us. And I'll just share this quickly with you, Mike. I think I shared this on another show. I had a client that was a banker. She was a vice president of a large, major, really bank here in the United States. And she was accused of stealing money through CD accounts. And now I was an economic crimes prosecutor, so I know how these work. And she came in and sold me a bill of goods, which is possible, wasn't probable, especially with my experience. But the prosecutor didn't have a lot of experience in this area. And as you know, fraud cases are very particular. It's more like you have to be an accountant and a lawyer. So I told her, I said, listen, right now they're accusing you of stealing $150,000. From what you're telling me, you really only stole $10,000 and you just kept cycling it around the bank. I said, are you sure this is what you said? I said, because in order to show the prosecutor that it's not 150, that it's only 10, I got to show him how to find the evidence. And if you're lying to me, I'm actually pointing him in the direction to convict you. Are you sure you're now you know where this is going, right? 3 months later, after I told him what I wanted him to do to investigate to prove that my client wasn't guilty of stealing 150, he came in all excited. And you know who he is. I'll tell you off camera. He's already retired. Super excited. I used to work with him in the unit. Came all excited. Ed, you were so right. This is exactly proof of how it happened. But your client didn't steal. Your client didn't steal 150. They stole, at least as far as I can see so far, $500,000. And I called her in the hallway, and all I did was look at her and say, you lied to me, didn't you? And she started crying. Immediately she knew she lied. Do not lie to us. It's going to make it harder for us and worse for you.
Well, apart from that, getting back to video right. Doesn't lie, but video can be manipulated. And so let's talk about some of the cons associated with video. And one of them is technology issues, right? So I have a case right now where it's a domestic violence case. The police show up, they're wearing body cam, and the victim gives them a verbal statement, which is codified in the police report. And the statement is inconsistent with the observations of the officer, which is also codified in the police report. The victim tells the police officer, again, written in the report, that the defendant, my client, punched the victim in the face, quote, multiple times with a closed fist. This is a direct quote. Punched in the face multiple times with a closed fist. The officer indicates on the police reports that there were no signs of visible injury, no bruises, no lacerations, no cuts, no redness, no swelling, no nothing. They're all check boxes. And the only one that's checked is no visible signs of injury, and that medical treatment was denied. So the video now becomes very important to me because, number one, I want to lock this guy into saying I was punched in the face multiple times with a closed fist, in light of a video which will show purportedly what this police officer wrote, that there is absolutely no physical corroborating evidence this individual was ever touched in his face, right? Unfortunately, the video was never tendered to me. So I filed a motion to compel, meaning I asked the court to order the prosecutor to give me the damn video that I'm entitled to. And the prosecutor writes me back a statement that says, we're sorry, but the video equipment malfunctioned. According to the police officer, according to the police department, there is no video because it was a equipment malfunction. Okay. Do I know whether or not there was an equipment malfunction? Absolutely not. Is it possible? Sure. Sometimes my phone doesn't work. Equipment malfunctions. That's one of the downsides of electronics and technology. You know, you have issues. These things are battery powered. They're cloud-based. You know, you've got uploads and downloads. You've got environmental issues. Maybe it's humid and the lens gets blurry. Whatever the reason, you know, I suppose things happen. But now this is a significant issue in this case because the crux of the case is, did my client commit domestic battery against this victim? And all we have is word on word without any corroborating evidence. Police never took any pictures. Why should they? I mean, they should have anyhow. But presumably the officer believed that his body cam was working because it's written right in the report. BWC active by Officer X. But there we go. It's a technology issue.
Right.
So
and it may have been at the time of recording. Sometimes it's at the time of downloading it at the station. It could happen many different places where there is a malfunction.
So that's one issue. Another issue is cons we're talking about here. Another issue is costs, right? Body cams are not cheap. The equipment is expensive. The technology is expensive. The maintenance is expensive. You know, imagine if you have a police department like Metro-Dade, right? How many cops do they have? 5,000 or so? A lot of cops. I don't know what the number is. It could be 3,000. It could be 6,000. Whatever it is, it's a lot. I mean, we're not talking about.
And if you think about it, really, the size of the department doesn't matter because the smaller departments also have less funding. So at the end of the day, it's still expensive.
Either way, it's expensive, right? So you know, so that's another issue. And then you've got another con in terms of performance issues. So here's the other one.
I heard you're familiar with that, but
yeah. The performance issue is when people know that they're being recorded, sometimes they're not as genuine as they might otherwise be, right? So you might change your behavior while you're being recorded to something other than what it normally would have been or what it was prior to or after being recorded. So that's another potential problem. And then finally, the last one that I note is I would call it manipulation. Right? That's where an officer intentionally does something, like turning off that camera. Or in the case that you were talking about earlier, I don't know that this happened, but I'm just saying it's possible that your guy knew there's a 30-second audio delay, right? And so he intentionally hit his on button late to avoid, right? Although that wouldn't make sense in your case because he would want that recorded if he was
but I'll tell you what they did do. When after they took my client into custody, the lead officer and his partner went into his patrol car to start writing up the report, and the sergeant came over and they turned off the volume. They turned off the audio intentionally, but left the camera going. And you see the sergeant gesturing with hands, and you see the lead officer gesturing with, which I mean, it's just obvious that they're talking about the case, but they turned off the audio on purpose. So that's something that's going to make
that's a great example of manipulation. So we would want to know what the hell was going on. What were you guys discussing? What was the deal?
And Mike, you and I both know it doesn't really matter at that point. I don't know. I mean, listen, this is, if anybody's watching, we're helping out law enforcement. But do they not realize that the jury is going to be like any other human being on the planet? They're going to say, "What the hell were you afraid of? Why didn't you want us to hear what you were talking about?"
That's the benefit to us, right? And these guys have their own reason. And I suspect that part of the reason they shut it off is because they've already made the arrest. The guy's already in custody, and they don't want you to understand or know about their internal discussions. But really what's happening a lot of those times is they don't know what the hell to charge the guy with. They don't know how to book him. They don't know this. They have to figure it out. They got to call in 3 other officers to figure out the police manual. I mean, honestly, it's sad but true that a lot of these guys just really are not as bright as they should be or as well trained as they should be. To their credit, the longer they do the job, the more experience they get, the better they get at it. And they don't, then they become the source of information.
Well,
right?
Let's be honest. Some have been cops for 30 years, and just like I say, people have been driving for 30 years and still can't drive with a damn.
Yep.
There's some that have been doing it for 30 years, and they still can't do their job with a damn. Sorry.
So
not the ones that are good.
Let's talk a little bit about a couple other things since we've only got about 20 minutes left. I don't think we can, Kyle Rittenhouse, we don't really need to get into. And the only reason I was going to bring him up was because here's a kid who was charged with some very serious charges. I mean, as serious as it gets, right? And he levied a stand your ground, basically self-defense case. If there was not significant video surveillance footage of what actually happened, tracking this guy that night, pretty much from start to finish, everywhere he went, from cell phones to government-mounted security cameras to police dash cams, all the combination of these things were able to support his contention as to what he was saying he was doing,
and
which many people found to be an incredible story, right? But the video evidence supported it.
And let's be honest, without getting into it, whether you believe or whatever, the jury spoke. It's over. It is what it is. But for those videos, Mike, I think even the supporters of Kyle Rittenhouse would admit that if those videos were not existent, it looked really bad, right? The narrative,
whether they would admit it or not, that is the fact. If this kid did not have that video evidence, he was guilty. He was going down.
17 years old in a county that you don't live in, with an AR-15 that's not even yours. We're walking around in a place where everybody's dangerous and there's a lot of crime and violence going on. I mean, it really sounded like, I don't know, it sounded like he was looking for trouble. But
absolutely, the video is what was the difference maker in his case.
Right.
And that kind of takes us into the reason that I wanted to bring that up was it takes us into civilian video, surveillance video. And I'll give you a couple of examples and then we can run with that. So in the city of Sunny Isles Beach, which a lot of DUIs occur there, for some inexplicable reason, they still do not have either body cams or dash cams in the entire city. Now they do have LDRs, LBCs, those land-based cameras. They have them all over the place. But the officers and their vehicles are not hardwired for audio or video. So unless they call in an officer from Aventura or North Miami Beach to help with the DUI processing, there's not going to be any video. It's going to be officer's word, he said, she said. A lot of times, there's a lot of businesses up and down A1A in Sunny Isles Beach. And so a lot of times, I will subpoena private surveillance camera footage from banks or restaurants or even condominiums, and I'm able to show whether or not the driving pattern or other things, some things that the officer indicates that were generally to the basis of the stop ever existed. For instance, I had one where my client was accused of driving northbound on A1A, and he was allegedly swerving in between lanes, and the officer put on his lights and siren, and my client allegedly went into the left lane and made a U-turn towards southbound A1A, and then rode up, crossed the 3 lanes, and rode up halfway onto the sidewalk where he came to a stop with his car halfway parked on the sidewalk and halfway on the street in the right lane of traffic. So when you read this police report, you know, obviously the officer has covered his bases in terms of why he conducted the stop. So I wanted to know whether or not that was true. And it happened to be right in front of a McDonald's and right across the street from a condo. So I was able to get video footage from the condo that actually showed the street. And you could see my client coming up on that point where he made the U-turn. And then you could see him make the U-turn. And then from the McDonald's or Burger King or whatever it was, you could see how my client actually, and believe it or not, every single word the officer said was 100% corroborated by the video. My client was all over A1A northbound, did make the U-turn with the officer with lights and sirens behind him that also had to make a U-turn. And my client did go across 3 lanes, and he did stop halfway on the sidewalk and halfway on the street. Now, of course, my client told me this was all bullshit. And so when I got the video, I was able to sit down and show it to him. But this was not police video, okay? Obviously, it would have been a lot easier and less expensive for the defense if the police had these videos, because then we would have had that and we would have known, right? So if the officer had written up the A form, and at the very bottom of the A form it said dash cam and body cam available upon request, different story. I wouldn't have had to engage my investigator to go out and try and subpoena those independent private footage. But it's very important for your defense attorney to think about things like this. That's a pro tip. We need to know not just what you say and not just what the cops say. We need to know what else can we prove, right? And so you have things like Ring doorbell videos. You have things like land-based cameras. A lot of cities have intersection cameras. They call them red light cameras. Those things are recording, right? You can get footage from those things.
And for civilians now, I've seen them. I've been considering buying some for me and my whole family. Dash cams for civilians are not that expensive anymore, Mike. They're pretty cheap.
Well, you may recall that you and I did a show a couple of weeks ago or months ago where
well, I don't recall what I did yesterday.
Mark, you'll remember this. Mark was on the show, and it was called Mr. Popper's Pistol. It was about that guy who was driving southbound during rush hour on 95, and he thought the guy was going to shoot him. Turns out the guy had thrown a water bottle, but he pulled out his gun and pumped 11 rounds or however many it was out at this guy. Shot through his passenger window, his front window. He just, 11 rounds. So that guy had his own car wired for video. Right. So there was cameras showing him from every angle and also pointing out. So we had video footage of the guy coming up on his side, right? Which showed, at least arguably, that the guy was put down his window and was going to do something. Turns out he says it was a water bottle, but who knows what this guy was thinking it could have been reasonably in his own mind.
Reasonably. And then he could have thought it was a Molotov cocktail. Reasonably.
Could have been. Right. There's no way to know. Now, again, whether he was justified in pumping off 11 rounds, that's a whole different story. But the point is, if he were to say, oh, this guy did X, Y, and Z, but there was no video, he'd have a much tougher argument to make than he had with the video, right? So the video really was very helpful for him. I have a client who has been arrested a couple of times, twice. Both times charges were all dismissed. They were both bad arrests. He's an unlucky dude, but he's also a pretty sharp dude, and he's also a pretty well-off dude. So he bought himself a automated audio and video recording system, which he installed in his vehicle, that has like 24-point angles and operates 24/7, 360 all the way around the car, interior and exterior, whether the car is on or off. Okay? So, and the battery system is like a 3-day backup.
Now that you're mentioning it, I'm remembering a case where a brother was a known drug dealer. Not going to tell you the specifics, but let's just leave it at that. The brother was a very well-known drug dealer. One of my former buddies at narcotics, when I'm a private attorney now, but one of the narcotics detectives that I know, a sergeant, arrests this guy, trying to get him because they know he's known. I had the case. Guy has a very odd last name, very, very particular last name. And I called him up. I said, what's going on? He told me, look, this guy's a very known drug dealer, big time. We're after him. I said, well, you got nothing here. He goes, no, I know. Fast forward about 3 weeks, not 3 weeks, about 3 months. I get the same lawyer who referred me that case calls me, says, "You're not going to believe this. They tried to arrest that guy's brother at his house, but this guy had surveillance cameras all around his house, but these detectives didn't know it. Let's just say that the detectives violated his rights so badly, not knowing the cameras were there. So when the guy who referred me the case called me, he's like, "Look, this is what I want to do. We're going to take federal. We're going to do this. We're going to do that." I said, "Look, at the end of the day, what they did do under the law, the cops, they violated his rights, but all they did was trespass. Case is going to get dismissed. And we could take 6 months to a year to file motions. The guy's going to get arrested and he's going to spend the night in jail. He's going to do a bond. Or you can let me call that sergeant and tell him, I got the video. Not going to look good for you. You either go in and drop those charges, or I'm going to have to do my job and file motions." So in this case, his cameras helped him. And of course, I don't need to tell you, right? The detective was at the state attorney's office the next day telling him to drop all the charges. So it helps to have them in your house too.
Whether it's a Ring doorbell or it's home security, I think we talked about a case once.
And hold on, before we go, and remember what we talked about last week. This is your property, your home. Nobody has an expectation of privacy in your property, in your home. You do not have to tell detectives or the UPS driver or anybody coming to your house that you're recording them, audio or video. Not necessary. So you can put these in your house and you have no worries about anything.
So let's change that up a little bit. Let's say that you're on the street and John Q, police officer, walks up to you and wants to talk to you, or you get pulled over for a traffic stop. For whatever reason, there's a police citizen encounter, and you decide, I'm going to record this thing. All right?
Yep.
Audio, video, whatever.
All of it.
So now the question is there a reasonable expectation of privacy?
Nope.
And whether or not you have the right to record that police officer.
Absolutely.
Because I think we talked about this last week. I'm pretty sure that you mentioned it, unless I imagined it. But I'm pretty sure that you mentioned that you see these things on, TikTok and YouTube, social media, where these lawyers are telling people, do this, do that, do the other. Look, we don't tell you what to do. We sometimes will tell you what not to do, okay? I mean, really, although we do tell you what to do in terms of invoking and hashtag UpX2. But overall, we tell you what not to do, right? So if you want to record the encounter with that police officer, you have every right to do that. Every right. Now, does the police officer get pissed off sometimes? Do they tell you to shut off your camera? What if you're a passenger? What if you and I are in the car, Ed, and I get pulled over, I'm driving, and you're in the passenger seat, you pull out your camera and start recording it. The cop says to you, "What are you doing?" And you say, "I'm recording this." And he says, "Turn that off. Turn it off."
Nope. And pro tip, don't get stupid. Simply say, "Officer, I'm recording. I have every right to record. I'm an American citizen." Let him get pissed. Let him slap the phone out of your hand.
On tape.
Right.
On tape.
You maintain your cool, and he will have zero defense as to what he did. If he did anything other than, "It's quite all right, sir. You have every right to record. Continue." So that's what his response should be.
That's something that I want everybody to understand. I don't encourage you to just, record people for the hell of it. But if you believe that you need to do this to protect yourself, or it will give you comfort, or it may be of evidentiary value to you, you're entitled to do it. And here's my pro tip for you. If you come across that police officer who says to you, "Turn that off or else," you should immediately dial 911, okay? And here's why. Because you have the right to have another officer dispatched to that scene. And you will be recorded. That call will be recorded. And you can say, "I'm in a vehicle, I'm at this location, there's an officer here, he's threatened me, I want a supervisor to respond immediately, I'm afraid for my safety." That's it. That is now recorded from there until the end of time.
And I would add, "I'm recording this encounter and he's asking me to turn it off, and he's threatening me because I'm recording this police encounter."
However you want to do it. The point is, you can do that. All right. So don't feel like you don't have a remedy, but what you should not do, and here's the thing that we're going to tell you what not to do, is don't get into it with the cops.
Never.
Because look, there's a time and a place for everything. right? The time and place to levy a fight with law enforcement is in a courtroom, not on the roadside. Very rarely will you win. And even if you win, you lose. We've talked about the expression, you could beat the rap, but you won't beat the ride. And it's very, very true, right? It's very rare that a police officer is going to successfully be sued for violating your constitutional rights. They're few and far between, especially if you're not, beaten to a pulp or murdered. Okay.
And that's a show for another time. But yeah, it's not what you guys think. It's not that easy. And yes, they don't have unfettered, ability to do whatever they want, but it's not that easy. And Mike, I want to mention one other thing about side of the road. And I've got 9% on my laptop, so hopefully we can finish before it dies. But besides all the things that we've always talked about, right, Mike? You're not going to win on the side of the road. All the cops are trying to do is anything you admit at the side of the road is going to be used against you in a confession. There's something that we always forget to mention, and when it goes to trial, it's important. Anything that you say at that police encounter that is a defense to your position, you can't use it anyway because the state attorney will prevent that by being used, saying it is called self-serving hearsay. So you are wasting your time, and if anything, the only thing you're doing is making it better for them. Even if it's the police encounter and you're recording him and the cop is being an ass, you being a bigger ass is going to make
never going to play well.
Or a judge say, well, you know what? You kind of had it coming because you were an ass.
Let me get one last thing in before we shut down, because I did want to talk about this. Other types of surveillance that are used, things like drones and thermal imaging, very common, right? We have this a lot. Flyovers, the police helicopters sometimes are equipped with thermal imaging. What are they looking for? Grow houses. Because grow houses, from the outside of the house, you have no idea that it's a grow house, but when you look down on the thermal imaging of the home and you see the heat lamps inside the house, based on information that they may have to corroborate tips, to corroborate confidential informants, that's another type of surveillance. It is another type of videography. They are literally doing a flyover of your property. Sometimes they don't do it with helicopters. Sometimes they do it with drones. It's very common for police and law enforcement to use this type of equipment in order to conduct searches, even without a warrant, right? So be aware of those things as well.
But I will say this. They need to know that's been determined unconstitutional. That is vis-a-vis per se an invasion of your privacy. You cannot do that because the court has determined that there are other things other than heat lamps of grow houses that will detect the heat, kind of like coming out of the shower. And if you have, not that I would have at this age anymore, but perhaps in a younger period of my life, even believe it or not, sexual encounters can sometimes get pretty heated and the room itself can get pretty hot.
All right,
and
chill there, Romeo. All right, Romeo.
That's what
Romeo.
There are so many. No, they determined this was a case law, not me. Read the case law. The case law said that even sexual encounters, being naked, coming out of the shower, doing things that you have a right to privacy can sometimes enhance the heat. So it's been unconstitutional. So they can't use that. Now, the reason I say this is this, Mike. What's to prevent law enforcement from doing it? Not putting it in the arrest affidavit or the warrant, but now they know you got to grow.
Absolutely nothing.
They show up and say, well, I smelled marijuana. So,
right. So that's another, another show for another day will be, cultivation, grow houses and dope cases. We do need to redo another episode on that. But I think we've hit a lot of ground today. And I think that we've given a pretty good idea of the pros and cons of body cams and dash cams, how they can help not only law enforcement, but your defense attorney as well. And other types of surveillance that would not be police initiated, such as you're doing your own recording or other citizens or civilians on the street doing recordings, or perhaps security or surveillance in your own home or Ring doorbells or what have you. Right. All of these types of things can be helpful. They can also be damning because, again, it is what it is. we're not going to manipulate that footage. We're going to accept it for what it is. But we recognize, again, going back to the Chauvin-Floyd issue, just because a video shows you something, it doesn't mean it shows you everything. And so it behooves you to have an attorney who's thinking outside of the box and not completely linked to the video, because sometimes there are other explanations, other angles, other factors that have to be considered and argued. And if you're lucky, everything falls into place. And if you're smart, you have lawyers who are looking for those types of angles to be able to expose them and show that there is, in fact, reasonable doubt or a solid basis for a motion to suppress or dismiss. Yes?
All right. Yeah, absolutely, my friend. There's a little bit of a delay, I think, with my laptop because I'm dying over here. But
All right. Well, listen, we're done
dying
anyhow.
out.
So let's wrap it. Let's wrap it up and thank everybody for their time and attention today. We really appreciate it. We're happy to be here and give you information and a few pro tips that hopefully help you and perhaps even entertain you and interest you. That would be a complete success story for us. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode of At Your Service with Haber and Martinez with another interesting topic. Until then, thank you, Ed. Thank you, folks.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Thank you,
Miami's community newspapers. And we'll look forward to seeing you all next Monday.